All right. So we're going through the top 100 best albums of 2022. And in the previous video, which you should watch, I explain my metrics. I explain how I compiled the list and all that. And then I went through the first 25 items on the list. So we're starting today at number 75 with Rothead's Slither and Slime on Memento Mori. And so we're really getting into a little more depth with these. And I like, I kind of struggled with this one because I wanted to put higher in the list, but these were the best of the best. And what was really resonating with me as I re listened to everything. And I think one of the reasons why I kept bumping Rotheads up into the top 75 is because this record just sounds amazing. And the not only that, but they've written memorable pieces that stuck with me, whether they're just fun, whether the riffs are just awesome, whatever it is. This is what I like about death metal and pretty classic style death metal too. So why put this on 75 but leave Morbific down further on the list? I think it's because these guys have just been at it longer. They're right. They've got the horror part of it down to the point where they're creating their own atmospheres or their own textures and uh, writing songs that are just characteristic of like I know this is a Rotheads album. Picking up any song on this thing, and the way that I described it was um, the feeling of having a stereo back in the 90s and putting on a record and how it filled the room with kind of an obnoxious but still heavy sound with that centralized bass to it. Uh, I felt that when I put this on. It's the atmosphere that I remember, but from like a practice. It's a weird observation, but this is the way death metal sounds to me when I remember it in a nostalgic way, and not in an artificial way. Beyond that, it's just a cool band. I think they're cool guys. They're all, uh, I like their previous record quite a bit, but it felt like there was a loose screw somewhere that was just not pulling it all together all the way. It was still a good record. I think it was on my top list that year too. But this one gets it right. I think that the production is kind of awesome. The guitar sounds are all crazy. It's just an over the top heavy death metal record, and I went back to it a lot over over the course of the year because it was just it's the thing you kind of like you need a fix, and this record has it in terms of that sound. So uh, number 74 is Near Death Conditions Ascent from the Mundane on Unique Leader Records. Now, so this is an Italian band who are known for technical death metal for the most part, which is influenced by Morbid Angel. And they've been in other projects that are in that style, but this is a group that I remember from the sort of the early 2000s or mid 2000s from Unique Leader Records. Looking because I enjoy technical death metal records influenced by Morbid Angel. Like that's just a thing that I love, and it was especially popular in a certain time period. So in a way, this record calls back to a thing that I like that is not as common anymore. I think like Diabolic or that kind of thing where they hate Eternal and whatnot. Um, so it just so happens that this record has important psychological, philosophical considerations behind it as well, and it has some influence from Immolation as well. So put all those things together, and you've got me listening for hours and hours at a time. I think the production is pretty fine, and I it sort of relates to what I liked about some of their other projects in the interim because I think it's been a while since they released anything for this project. So it was cool to see this record get some due and some notice, and be on what is quite a big label these days. Slow Death. This one, Into the Machine House, is probably more notable if you are looking for obscure psychedelic rock with its own kind of twist to it. Um, Here I emphasize things like post-punk and neo-psychedelia and space rock, but when you're listening to it, there is like a bit of Stooges to their sound too, and it makes for a kind of a jam, kind of like just a good, kind of dark but not too serious throwback psychedelic rock record with some interesting influences otherwise. So, uh, particularly love the sound of this record and the kind of the lo-fi nature of certain aspects of that sound, and it just feels like human beings made it. And I liked it a lot. I kept listening to it and eventually bought a copy of it. 72 is Empty's Omnia Amet Lorem, which is on Dracar and a couple other labels out of Spain. Uh, this is a Spanish black metal band that's been around for quite a while, um, and the guy who leads the band is he's played in some other bands that are maybe more related to traditional heavy metal, and this one has been his sort of impetus as an artist in black metal, and it really focuses on uh, the depressive side of things, the personal dark subjects, and it really is like a his discography really speaks to like solitude and musing over things that other people wouldn't necessarily understand. It's pretty interesting anyway, but it's a pretty varied discography otherwise, and the signature has developed over the years in various different undertakings. I think what stood out to me about this record was that it took it in a different atmospheric direction. The performances are particularly fine on this record, and these songs are more of a atmospheric spectacle than past recordings. It does relate to the previous album, but you can tell there's some different people playing on this record, and it was something I really enjoyed coming back to. I wasn't expecting to like this record at all, but it turned out I listened to it for like 2 months straight, so it was definitely worth including on here for the sort of impact felt. 71, Anaeon's Nemocene. It's out on Agnia Records, and this is a progressive black metal band who were, I guess, they were related to Transcending Bizarre in some ways, but not quite that strange. Their style was more in line with the the early 2000s Norwegian twist upon the formula of progressive black metal, and they sort of made it their own over time. And on this record, they sort of shifted into what I would consider progressive black metal noir. And what I mean, well, it's not lounge music, so to speak, but they have their own sophisticated personality come like put into this music that makes it really is their own. And every single they put out for this thing made me more excited for it because it was all just memorable. Like whether the music videos were kind of evocative of what they were, the story they were telling, or the scenery they were showing it, and it has this cinematic quality to it as you listen to it, which appreciates over time. So I found myself uh, having to include this on the list, but not being sure where to put it, and it got pushed around up and down the list until it ended here. But it's definitely a record that I'll remember from this year as one that I connected with for just uh, the way they sort of defied expectations at every turn. So yeah, I really enjoyed it, and it's sort of like if you're a fan of like Hail Spirit Noir, but you want something that's entirely different but just as refined, I think this is a really good thing to pick up as well. Because I love that Hail Spirit Noir, the one before the synthwave one. Uh, I think this is complementary in spirit. It's pretty exceptional stuff. Number 70 is Black Fucking Cancer, Procreate in Verse, which is out on Sentient Ruin. So this California-based band I don't think this is like the most serious statement of the year, or that it's the finest riff work or anything. It's more that, like, I really love Catharsis. I think it's such a great black metal band, and anything that's even remotely like it that reaches anywhere near the level of effect that that band creates is worth celebrating, and they are few and far between. So Procreate Inverse is a crazily long-winded record. It's like an hour long, and some of the songs are like 15 minutes long on this, and it's all just black death metal destruction. It's a great record, and I think a lot of people just weren't willing to sit with it and put up with the barrage of noise that it puts out. I thought it was great, and I didn't see too many people talking about it because, well, what do you say, right? So anyway, uh, a lot of people might wonder, well, what the fuck is this doing on this part of the list? Well, I think if you spend enough time with it, it'll be obvious why uh, the effect it creates will sort of necessitate why it had any impact on me at all. Um, Number 69 is Falls of Raros, Key to a Vanishing Future, which I think was a split release between Gilead Media and Eisenwald. And so this is an atmospheric post-black metal band, and I say post-black metal because their sound has changed over time. I followed this band mostly from the beginning, probably at least the first album. I wasn't that impressed with every single release they put out, and this one is a little bit different. This one is introspective. It's expressive. It's um, existentially questioning. It explores a lot of new textures. There's almost like a Krauss-esque exploration of progressive death metal technicality applied to their own sound, and one that they've still braced with uh, modern rock influences. So there's not too many things just like this that reach this level of refinement and goes to places where they went with it. I think this was very underrated overall, and just uh, one of those records where I see the cover and I want to go listen to it. It's that kind of effect where I had such a good time with it. I'm ready to go grab it and pick it up every time I see it. So that's always a good sign. Uh, Inanimate Existence is a Southern California or California-based, I think Bay Area-based technical death metal band. Let's call them a technical progressive death metal band who put out quite a few records. Their earlier style was sort of pretty typical. They were on Unique Leader early on, and they focused on a technical death metal that was modern and pretty good at the time. Uh, they kind of lost their way somewhere in the middle. It seemed like they were trying to break and get noticed playing whatever was big at the time, and it just wasn't that interesting. It was turning towards like kind of deathcore. I didn't like any of that. And then they went independent, chopped down the size of the team, and put out a string of fantastic records ever since. I bought every single one when it released, and The Masquerade is no exception in the quality they've put out since joining the Artisan era, who are a little bit too limited with their vinyl releases overall. Um, so, yeah, if you're a fan of Obscura, Spawn of Possession, Decrepit Birth, you're going to like what this band does. They do have their own kind of dual vocal approach to things. They have their own fairly unique voicing on the guitars, definitely complex, but still having fun with it. Very impressive band. There are a few that are able to write songs but still play and compose at this level. And that's saying something considering how much absolute trash there is out there in terms of technical and progressive death metal, which is kind of machined through computers and soulless. So this stands out to me. I was only disappointed because when I bought this CD, it was completely crushed by the fulfillment company. The case was, and it scratched up the CD. So That's like never buying from you again. You know, that's a kind of a bummer. Uh, which actually for number 67, the vinyl was somehow damaged, had a chunk taken out of it. Didn't affect the play of it, but you know, that's a bummer too. Prayer Group's Michael Dose, I think, is their second full length album, and it's a noise rock post hardcore record that has some hardcore punk influences that keep it interesting, keep it feeling like an early 90s record. And you can tell they're having fun, but also existentially questioning to a terrifying degree while they refer to microdosing. A lot of inside jokes on this record, um, and a lot of cool guitar work on this record. I think that helped it stand out. I think I liked basically everything Reptilian put out this year. Uh, I think Salvation was great, Salvation's record, and yeah, Desperate Living or whatever that other record was called. So if you don't like noise rock, don't listen to it, you know. But I think it's a probably the best one that I heard this year in that subgenre, and a pretty lacking year for anything noise rock related in general. Uh, Number 66 is Species, To Find Deliverance on Awakening Records. I think Awakening Records they consistently put out fantastic old school re-releases, reissues, as well as old school death metal, thrash metal, and even some traditional heavy metal. And they basically Species is like this fairly young group of people out of Poland, Warsaw, in fact, who play their own take on progressive thrash metal. And it's hard to find a, a group of similar enough bands. Like you could think of sort of the German side of things early on in the mid to late 80s, Mekong Delta and whatnot. But these guys, they're really developing their own approach to this, and it is personal, existentially questioning music, uh, which it's a cool thing to see because you just don't find bands like this, and everything about this feels apart from the norm today, where it feels like it's a personal creation. That anyway, I listened to it endlessly. I thought it was great, and it felt like an old school progressive thrash metal album. So I'm interested to see where they go with it next and how far they push in or out of thrash metal. But yeah, compare this to what was it? I forget the name of the band last year. Who the British band? I probably have to Google it, but Atma or anyway, doesn't matter. Uh, there's a fresh perspective on progressive thrash metal happening here, and I hope that they continue to develop it. Uh, Another kind of throwback towards the heavy speed metal, thrash metal side of things is Ironhawk's Ritual of the Warpath. Now, this is a New Zealand based group, I believe, who just like this is the gnarliest sounding metal punk album that I've heard in a while. It's oh, Tasmania. Oh, so they're sorry, they're Australian, and not only does the record sound mean, metallic, you know, it's like they're chewing on foil. It's great. It's got this kind of nuclear hit. Uh, if you're familiar with Grave Infestation's side project, Anna, and the last record they released, this has that sort of aggressive, crusted over uh, 82 kind of hardcore feeling to it, while also obviously being a speed metal group. So I listen to this like every time I see that. It's another one where I pick up this record, I look at it, and I have to listen to it just because it's it's a thing, you know. And I just love the album artwork too. Um, Obscene. Indiana-based death metal band, Obscene, really struck out with a lot of charisma and personality this year. I think that their first record was just, it was awesome. It was a great old school death metal record that had sort of a Swedish American kind of ratio going on with it. And this one, this one picks up on a lot of those same ideas, but they're here to write songs. They're here to catch your ear and put on a big show. And you see that in their live performances, but also in the songs this time around. This was a memorable record where you get the heavy metal band personality, not really cocky, but like this is a death metal band who are going for it and making some noise and writing pretty good songs too. So they definitely caught my attention on here. So number 63 is Verbum's Exhortation to the Impure, which was on Iron Bonehead Productions. For this record, I interviewed the band and premiered the album and got to sort of pick their brains about what their intent was. And it's a death doom metal band in a not completely traditional style. I compare them to like Blood-Soaked Necrovoid, where there's that cryptic occult feeling to what they're doing, and just a really heavy death doom metal sound. So, um, this was I think a January release, and it stuck with me throughout the year. I returned to it quite a bit. Um, but you have 12 months to think about an album, and suddenly something else is more exciting and new, or yada yada. So I had to kind of fight that, but it is still a great album. I still enjoy listening to it, and they've written some memorable songs on here that are worth repeating. So I stuck with that one. Um, Encryptment's Dudens Fudsel. I don't know how to pronounce anything Swedish, so Dodens Fudsel is how I would say it in whatever you know pronunciation that is. On Nuclear Winter Records, and this is a pretty cool thing. It's these guys started a death metal band, a different band, and they tried their hand at a traditional style of death metal of the era, and they weren't feeling it, you know. So they reformed a different band and said, we're going to play all the types of music that we're interested in, that we like, and make records basically for us in the style that we think is interesting. So what did that mean? That meant uh, basically crust punk, death metal, blackened death metal, and kind of neo crust, which like think like um, Martyrdod and Tragedy, among others. So the result is kind of an interesting mixture of black death metal severity, death crust intensity, and the anthemic nature of those specific modern crust influences, and all of this coming together with a really great production value. So this one I feel was like completely underrated for just how not only is it like a musical record, but there isn't a bad song on it. It flows together nicely, and it's a pretty short and not too demanding thing. So I think it's something that fans of uh, crust and hardcore punk will appreciate first. Kind of, it was the case with Bombs of Hades, where like a punk fan gets excited about it because it's just never done this well for Death Crust anything. So this is on that similar tip, except there's a little bit of a Swedish Black Death affect to it, which adds to the presence of the album, and it all comes together so well for this record that I just didn't see enough people excited about it as I was but these are like many things that I like meshed in a way that makes a lot of sense and ends up with good songs. So that counted for a lot with me, and I've still been enjoying listening to it. Uh, Another record that was kind of just a flash for a lot of people was Egregor's "The Word of His Law" on 20 Buck Spin. It's a short record. There's a long ambient track at the end, so there isn't that much uh, like the riffs. It really does. They've compacted so many ideas and such an exciting set of songs to start with that it's easy to be like, well, all right, I need 20 more minutes of this stuff with the riffs, right? So, where do bands like Absu and their hyper technical compositions and Nocturnus with their atmospheric um, death metal circus kind of come together? Something like early Asheron, if it was, I guess, put out by Absu in the early 2000s. Very intense. There's a Stargazer esque side to this that I'd felt, but this comes from, I think, people who are in some of my favorite death metal bands or black death metal bands out of Vancouver, BC, and you can look all that up yourself. But this is a great start. It's like a teaser for like what they can do next. I think they should at least put out another EP or whatever before they head for the full length side of things. But um, as much as I stopped connecting with the dark ambient side of the band after a while, the main pieces on here kept me engaged and kept me coming back to this record. It's just one of the cooler things that came out this year. A lot of people kind of swept under, like, well, that's cool, but what else, Uh, but yeah, I bought this record right away just because from the album art to the content in there, it all totally sewed together for me. And again, you know, 20 minutes or 15 minutes of riffs on a 20-minute album is nothing to sneeze at when they're all good, right? All right. So lastly, for this time around, Inexorum's Equinox Vigil out on Gilead Media. I think probably my favorite release from Gilead Media this year, and probably the best. Let's call it a melodic black death metal record, more related to melodic death metal. Uh, so these guys are from Minneapolis. I think they've both played in other bands or were involved with Obsequiae in some way. Uh, but I've liked their past work, their first two records they put out, but it never fully got me there in terms of where the melodies took me in terms of an emotionally evocative experience. And I think Equinox Vigil finally pulls in uh, enough of that to where it becomes like the involved emotional experience that it should be as this type of melodic black death metal style. The way I see it is, if Triarchy of the Lost Lovers is one of your favorite records because of the lead guitar style and how it directs the full experience, but you don't need all of the idiosyncratic rhythmic touches from that band and you just like more of that, there's a lot of that feeling put into this record where it's telling a story with lead guitars that take you on that trip. It's a simple thing. It's a heavy metal record basically, but a great one. And I found, as for a couple of months after it released, I was like, well, all right, it was cool, but I'll move on. And once the fall hit, or just like later on in the fall towards winter, it was the right time to listen to this record. I think it's a pretty memorable and finally made record that outdoes what they had done in the past, and I think reaches the goal of what the last one was aiming for much quicker. And yeah, there isn't a bad song on this thing. It does. kind of drone on in certain parts, but as to be expected from a melodic death metal record that is intending to kind of hammer its style home. So we'll stop there and get into the towards into the 50s on the next one. I don't want these to go past too far past a half an hour each. So there's part 2 for you.